"You're raising a problem, not a student," the woman said, tapping the folder like it offended her. "And we don't keep liabilities here. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." The room didn't gasp. It didn't argue. Chairs stayed still, parents stayed quiet, and the principal's voice carried like this was routine, like children were inventory, like one signature could erase a life, and everyone would nod along. He didn't interrupt, didn't correct the lie, didn't look at the boys seated behind her, smirking in identical blazers while his daughter stared at the floor. He watched the letter slide across the table, watched the weight of it land in her hands. Expulsion. Immediate. Necessary for the school's integrity. Because this wasn't about grades, or behavior, or even bullying. This was about power assuming it would never be questioned. The man they dismissed as a struggling single father finally spoke, and his voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. It didn't beg. He asked one thing calmly, as if confirming the weather. Was this decision final, and would it be entered into the official record today? That question alone unsettled the room more than shouting ever could. He was Eamon Calder, though no one there used his name with respect. To them, he was the maintenance aide who came in before sunrise, who fixed broken locks and cleaned up after assemblies like this one. He wore the same jacket every winter, ate lunch alone, signed permission slips with grease still under his nails. He stood now without urgency, placing a steady hand on the back of his daughter's chair. The posture wasn't defensive, it was anchoring. She leaned back into it without looking, trusting him the way only children who've been protected quietly do. Months earlier, he'd noticed the pattern. The principal's sons never disciplined, never corrected. Reports filed by teachers vanished. Notes from the counselor softened language until cruelty became misunderstanding. And every time his daughter came home quieter than before, he listened instead of reacting. That patience was mistaken for ignorance. He knew the building better than anyone. The service corridors, the terminals no one updated, the compliance language buried in charter documents administrators never reread after signing. While others talked in meetings, he worked in silence, observing who entered rooms, who authorized what, and which rules were treated like suggestions. The guidance counselor had tried once. She'd lowered her voice in her office, eyes on the door, telling him it was complicated, powerful families, donations, reputation. He thanked her for her honesty and said nothing else. Silence had become his tool. Today, the principal believed she was ending a problem. The parents believed justice had been served. The boys believed they were untouchable. He believed the system had finally stepped into the light. When the chair asked if there were questions before finalization, he raised his hand, slow and deliberate, not to argue the facts, not to accuse, only to confirm procedure, that the letter would be logged immediately, that the authorization had been verified, that the record would be immutable once entered. Each answer came confident, assured, careless, good. He knelt then, bringing himself level with his daughter, told her softly to breathe, that this wasn't the end of her story, that she'd done nothing wrong by telling the truth, even when no one listened. Her fingers tightened around the letter, then relaxed when she felt his hand close over it. Around them, the room waited for collapse, for tears, for a scene. What they didn't understand was that this was the moment everything aligned. The signature at the bottom of the page wasn't a formality. It wasn't delegated authority or an auto-approved stamp. It was the trigger. And once it entered the system, it would activate processes the principal had never bothered to learn about, because she never imagined needing protection from herself. He straightened, meeting her eyes for the first time that morning. There was no triumph there, only certainty. The kind that comes from knowing every step ahead because you built the path yourself. "Thank you for clarifying," he said, voice even, respectful. "Then we're done here." The gavel came down, the decision stood, and somewhere deep in the school's infrastructure, something woke up. Something woke up. Not an alarm anyone could hear, not a light anyone could see. Just a process buried under layers of policy and neglect, finally given permission to move. As the gavel echoed and parents stood, the system accepted the letter, time-stamped it, and began doing exactly what it was designed to do. He felt it before he saw it. The low hum from the wall terminal near the service corridor shifted pitch, a sound most people never noticed because it blended into the building's breath. He guided his daughter out of the auditorium, one hand steady at her shoulder, the other already reaching into his pocket for the old access badge he'd never replaced. She didn't speak, neither did he. Words would come later, when the walls weren't listening. Behind them, the principal was already performing reassurance. Calm smiles, practiced phrases. Parents were told the decision had been thorough and documented. The boys laughed too loudly, basking in the moment. The counselor avoided everyone's eyes, her hands folded tight around a notebook she hadn't opened. In the hallway, he stopped. "Give me a minute," he said softly. She nodded, stepping aside near the trophy case. He watched her reflection in the glass, the way she squared her shoulders like she was trying to hold herself together by force. That mattered. Everything he did from here on out would be for that posture alone. The service corridor door accepted his badge with a dull click. Inside, the air was cooler, quieter. He crossed to the terminal mounted between the electrical panels, its screen blinking from sleep to life. A notification scrolled past, fast enough that anyone else would have missed it. Compliance review initiated. Good. He didn't touch anything yet. The victory wouldn't come from interference. It would come from restraint. The system needed clean inputs, unchallenged authority, a straight path to expose what had been hidden. He let it run, memorizing the sequence, the timestamp stacking exactly where he'd expected. Footsteps approached. The counselor appeared at the threshold, breath shallow. "I didn't know," she said quickly. "About today, about how far she'd take it." "I know," he replied. Her eyes flicked to the screen behind him. "Is that routine?" he said, and meant it. She swallowed. "What happens now?" "That depends on how honest everyone's been." They stood there, the weight of it pressing in. She looked like she wanted to say more, like she was deciding whether fear or conscience would win. He didn't rush her. People only chose the right thing when they believed it was still possible. Outside, the principal's voice rose, sharper now, irritation slipping through control. A call was being placed. He recognized the cadence. Damage containment. The terminal chimed once. Stage 1. Verification complete. Names populated the screen, incident reports, edits, revisions, deleted attachments, patterns drawn without emotion. It wasn't accusing anyone yet. It was mapping behavior. He stepped back into the hallway and called his daughter over. She came slowly, eyes searching his face. "Are we going home?" she asked. "Soon," he said. "But not yet." Her brow furrowed. "Am I in trouble?" "No," he said, firm. "You told the truth. That's never trouble." She nodded, absorbing it like she always did. He hated how quickly she'd learned to brace herself. The principal appeared at the far end of the hall, phone pressed to her ear, expression tight. She saw him standing there, saw the terminal glow behind him, and hesitated for half a second too long. That hesitation was new. He met her gaze without challenge, without satisfaction. Just acknowledgement. She turned away, lowering her voice, walking faster. The counselor exhaled. "She's scared," she said. "She should be cautious," he replied. Another chime, stage 2. Pending witness input. He hadn't planned for that, not yet. The counselor looked at the screen, then at him. Her hands trembled. "Is that me?" "It's anyone who touched the record," he said. "Truth or silence, those are the options." The building shifted again, subtle but real. Doors opened, systems talked, notifications queued. He crouched beside his daughter, lowering his voice. "Some people are going to realize they made mistakes," he said. "They might act angry, or kind, or scared." "Will they stop?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "because now they have to answer to what they did." A bell rang, signaling dismissal. Students poured into the halls, unaware that something foundational had changed beneath their feet. He stood as the counselor straightened her shoulders. "I'll tell the truth," she said. "All of it." He nodded once. The first piece had fallen into place. The first piece had fallen into place. The counselor stayed behind as dismissal emptied the halls, her back straight but her face pale, like someone stepping onto ice she wasn't sure would hold. He didn't rush her. The system had invited her in. Now it was her choice to answer. "I need to gather my notes," she said, already knowing that notes weren't what the process wanted. "You'll have time," he replied. She hesitated, then nodded and walked toward her office. Her steps echoed longer than they should have. The building had a way of amplifying fear once it sensed it. He walked his daughter to the front entrance, watching students scatter into carpools and buses. The principal's sons passed them, laughing loudly, shoulders loose, victory still fresh. One of them glanced back, eyes sharp, daring him to react. He didn't. Outside, he crouched again, steadying her coat collar. "I'll be back in a bit," he said. "Wait by the bench, the one under the oak." "The one Mom liked?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She sat, hugging her backpack, small against the stone. He stayed until she looked settled, then turned back inside. Down the service corridor, the terminal glowed brighter now. A new pane had opened, lines of text stacking methodically. Stage 2 required corroboration. Witness input. Behavioral consistency. This was the part administrators never read about. It was buried intentionally, written by people who understood that corruption rarely confessed unless it felt watched. He logged in, not as an authority, not yet, but as an observer. The system allowed it, always had. Footsteps approached again, faster this time. The counselor returned, holding a thin folder, fingers white around the edges. "They told me to leave," she said. "Administration. They said today was volatile." "And you?" he asked. "I told them I needed to submit something first." The terminal chimed softly, almost polite. Witness slot opened. She swallowed. "I'm not brave," she said. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it." "That's enough," he replied. She stepped closer, reading the screen. Her name appeared, not accusatory, just present. The system wasn't judging her. It was asking. She reached out, then stopped. "If I do this, they'll know," he said, eventually. She exhaled slowly, then pressed her thumb to the scanner. The machine accepted it without ceremony. Documents uploaded, notes, emails. Internal memos softened, revised, stripped of urgency. The truth, laid out plainly, was uglier than he expected. Not malicious in every instance, but convenient. Repeated. Aloud. The counselor covered her mouth, eyes shining. "They always said it wasn't worth the trouble," she whispered. "That's how it grows," he said. Down the hall, raised voices broke through a door, the principal arguing with someone on speaker. He caught fragments. Legal counsel, image management, delays. The system didn't care about any of that. Stage 2, complete Stage 3. Cued administrative review. That would change the tone. He stepped away from the terminal as the principal's office door flew open. She emerged, phone still in hand, face tight with something new. Not anger, calculation. She saw him and stopped. "You," she said too sharply. He waited. "You don't work here," she continued. "Not like this, accessing systems, lingering." "I was invited," he said. "By whom?" She glanced at the counselor, who stood frozen near the wall. Something clicked behind the principal's eyes, fast and unpleasant. "This is inappropriate," she said. "Whatever you think you're doing." The terminal chimed again, louder now. Administrative review initiated. The counselor's phone buzzed, then the principal's. Then the one in the principal's hand lit up with an unfamiliar number. She answered it, posture shifting mid-sentence. Her voice changed, lower, careful. "Yes," she said. "Of course, I understand." She ended the call and looked at him differently now. Not down, sideways. "What did you trigger?" she asked. He didn't answer. Outside, through the glass, his daughter watched the building with quiet patience. Unaware that the structure meant to silence her, was beginning to turn inward. The principal straightened her jacket. "This isn't over," she said. He nodded. "No," he agreed. It was finally beginning. It was finally beginning. The principal stood there as if the hallway belonged to her by birthright. Shoulders squared, smile assembled with effort. Phones kept buzzing around her, little vibrations of a world she no longer controlled. She walked past him without another word, heels sharp against tile, already rehearsing a version of events where nothing was wrong. He waited until she disappeared down the corridor before moving again. The terminal screen dimmed to standby, but he could feel the process still running, like a current beneath the floor. Stage 3 didn't ask permission. It compared authority against conduct and flagged inconsistencies without emotion. Years ago, when he helped design it, people said it was excessive. He'd insisted it was necessary. The counselor leaned against the wall, shaking. "I've never seen her like that," she said. "Neither has anyone else," he replied. "That's why it works." They didn't linger. Visibility now mattered. He guided her back toward her office, keeping his pace unhurried, ordinary. Any sign of urgency would only draw attention. Along the way, they passed bulletin boards filled with achievement photos and donor plaques. Names repeated, influence documented in polished brass. In the office, she closed the door and sank into her chair. "What happens if they retaliate?" she asked. "If they come after my license?" "They'll have to explain why," he said. "And explanations create records." She nodded, absorbing that, then looked at him more closely. "You talk like someone who's been through this." "I have," he said, which was true enough. Outside, the afternoon shifted. Parents returned for after-school activities. The building filled again, unaware it was now under observation. He stepped into the service stairwell and descended one flight, stopping at a panel most people mistook for a fuse box. Inside was another access point, older, less secure, ignored for years. He checked the log. Requests were already queuing. Compliance officers, external auditors, a board liaison unfamiliar with the school's daily routines. Stage 3 brought outsiders, people who didn't care about legacy or donations. People who asked boring questions and waited for boring answers, then compared them. That was the pressure point. He closed the panel and climbed back up, emerging near the front entrance. His daughter still sat beneath the oak, legs swinging gently, backpack beside her. She looked up when she saw him, relief softening her face. "Are we in trouble?" she asked again. "No," he said, "but some adults are going to be uncomfortable." She considered that. "Because they were mean? Because they thought no one was watching," he replied. She nodded, satisfied, and returned to tracing patterns in the stone bench. He stayed standing this time, scanning the courtyard. The principal's sons lingered near the gate, phones out, confidence dimming as teachers approached them with unfamiliar seriousness. Inside, the counselor watched from a window, hand pressed to the glass. Her phone buzzed again. She answered, listening, then mouthed the words, "They want a statement." He met her eyes and gave a single nod. As she turned away, he felt the weight of the moment settle. This wasn't the end, not even close. Public exposure required patience. It needed the institution to reveal itself fully, to show its work in front of witnesses. He returned once more to the terminal, not to interfere, but to watch the timeline assemble itself with quiet precision. Access logs aligned with edits, edits aligned with decisions, decisions aligned with names that carried weight in the community. Donations appeared beside dates, committee emails beside policy exceptions, and patterns emerged that no explanation could soften. This was the exposure phase, still invisible to the crowd, but irreversible now. He knew the principal would attempt a private fix, a meeting, a favor, a promise of reform without consequence. The system anticipated that too, locking, changes, mirroring files, preserving originals beyond local control. By morning, independent reviewers would request interviews, not as accusations, but as requirements. Each refusal would register louder than any confession. He checked the courtyard again, measuring time, making sure his daughter wasn't alone too long. Public reckoning needed witnesses, but it also needed restraint. He would not rush the truth. He would let it arrive on schedule, undeniable, documented, and shared, with care for everyone involved, his child. The principal would fight. She always had, but she'd do it publicly now, because that's how she understood power. That was fine. He took his daughter's hand and led her toward the exit, passing through the threshold like any other parent at the end of a long day. Behind them, screens refreshed, emails sent, calendars adjusted. The school was still standing. It just no longer belonged to the people who thought it did. It just no longer belonged to the people who thought it did. The front doors closed behind them, with a soft thud, sealing the school in its own quiet unraveling. Evening air washed over the courtyard, carrying the distant sound of traffic and the ordinary rhythm of a day ending for everyone else. He walked his daughter toward the car, her hand warm in his, her steps lighter than they'd been hours ago. She hummed under her breath, a habit she only did when the worst fear had passed, but the tension hadn't fully let go. Inside the building, the principal wasn't going home. She stood in her office with the door locked, jacket draped over the chair she hadn't sat in, staring at her screen as emails stacked faster than she could read them. Requests for clarification, notifications of scheduled reviews. A calendar invite marked mandatory appeared without explanation. She deleted it once, it reappeared seconds later. She didn't call donors yet. That came later, when she could shape the narrative. First, she needed to contain the source. The counselor's office light was still on. By the time he reached the car, his phone vibrated once, not a call. A message routed through an internal channel he hadn't accessed in years. Stage 3 review confirmed. External observers assigned. Documentation freeze enacted. Good. He buckled his daughter in, adjusted the strap like he'd done 1,000 times before, then closed the door gently. As he walked around to the driver's side, she pressed her palm against the window. "Are you mad?" she asked. "No," he said. "I'm finished being patient." That made her smile. They drove home through streets glowing amber under early evening lights. He kept the radio off, letting the quiet settle. His thoughts moved methodically, not racing ahead, just checking steps. The next phase required witnesses, and the institution was already supplying them on its own. Back at the school, the principal knocked sharply on the counselor's door. "We need to talk," she said, voice tight. The counselor opened it slowly. "I've already submitted my statement." The principal's eyes hardened. "You didn't have authorization." "I had obligation," the counselor replied, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. That word landed heavier than accusation. The principal turned away without another word, already dialing. This time, she called legal counsel. This time, the voice on the other end didn't reassure her. At home, he cooked dinner with his daughter perched on the counter, legs swinging as she talked about things unrelated to school. A book she wanted, a science project idea, normal things. He listened closely, letting her steer the conversation where it needed to go. Protection didn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looked like letting a child feel ordinary again. After dinner, once she was settled with homework, his phone vibrated again. Another update. Stage 4, pending upon public administrative action. They were moving faster than expected. He sat at the table, fingers laced, and allowed himself one measured breath. If you're still here with us, make sure you're subscribed, because this isn't the part where things explode. It's the part where people realize they can't escape what they already set in motion. Across town, the principal paced her office, heels silent on carpet now, her confidence fraying. She had sent 2 emails already, both unsent drafts abandoned midway through excuses. She tried a third approach, reframing. She scheduled a special parent meeting under the guise of transparency. If she controlled the room, she could still survive this. What she didn't know was that the system had already mirrored the invite, flagged the language, and marked it as a public administrative action. Exactly what Stage 4 required. The next morning would bring questions she couldn't redirect. Parents would attend expecting reassurance and instead find auditors. Teachers would arrive prepared to defend policy and instead be asked to explain deviations. And somewhere in the audience, a quiet maintenance aide would sit with his daughter, not as an accuser, but as a witness. He tucked his daughter in that night, smoothing her hair as she drifted towards sleep. "Will they stop now?" she asked, eyes heavy. "They will," he said, "because they have to." She accepted that without doubt and rolled onto her side. He turned off the light and stood there a moment longer, listening to her breathe, anchoring himself to the reason this mattered. Tomorrow would be louder, public, uncomfortable for many. But tonight, the victory was simple. The truth was already awake. The truth was already awake. Morning arrived without ceremony. Gray light filtered through the kitchen window as he poured coffee and reviewed the overnight updates on his phone. No new messages meant the process was holding steady, which was exactly what he wanted. Systems like this failed when pushed. They succeeded when allowed to unfold. His daughter came in, rubbing her eyes, hair tangled, already dressed. She'd chosen the same sweater she wore on the day of the assembly, not out of defiance but habit. He noticed and said nothing. Children reclaim power in quiet ways adults often missed. They drove back to the school together, neither of them speaking much. The parking lot was fuller than usual for that hour. Cars he didn't recognize lined the curb. Unmarked sedans, rental vehicles, people who didn't belong to the daily rhythm of drop-offs and pickups. Auditors rarely announced themselves with fanfare. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted. Voices were lower, laughter absent. Teachers clustered in small groups, glancing toward the main office where unfamiliar faces moved with purpose, clipboards in hand. The principal's office door was closed. The glass walls that once signaled transparency now felt like exposure. He guided his daughter toward the seating area near the library, a public space with visibility and witnesses. He didn't want her hidden away again. That was part of the lesson, too. The counselor approached, pale but composed. "They're here," she said. "I know," he replied. "They asked for everyone involved in the expulsion decision." "That's appropriate," she hesitated. "They also asked about you." He met her gaze. "And?" "I told them you were maintenance staff," she said, then corrected herself. "I told them you were observant." A corner of his mouth lifted. "That's enough for now." The principal emerged moments later, flanked by two officials carrying folders thick with paper. Her smile was back, thinner this time, stretched too far across her face. She addressed the room with practiced calm, welcoming parents to what she called a transparency meeting. She spoke about values, about safety, about community. None of it slowed the auditors. They took seats among the parents instead of joining her at the front. One of them asked for copies of disciplinary records. Another requested access to digital logs. A third raised a hand and asked, very politely, why multiple incident reports regarding the same students had been edited after submission. The principal's smile faltered for the first time in public. He felt his daughter's fingers tighten around his sleeve. He rested his hand over hers, grounding both of them. Questions continued, each one simple, each one impossible to deflect without explanation. Teachers were invited to speak. Some did, some hesitated. Silence was noted alongside testimony. The counselor stood when prompted. Her voice shook at first, then steadied as she described patterns, pressure, and the quiet instructions to soften language for the sake of harmony. She didn't accuse. She didn't editorialize. She described. The auditors wrote everything down. When the principal attempted to redirect, one of them interrupted gently. "We'll need you to answer the question as asked." That sentence changed the room. He stayed seated. He didn't raise his hand. This wasn't his moment yet. Public exposure worked best when the institution revealed itself. Every attempt to maintain control only widened the gap between narrative and reality. The principal's sons were escorted out quietly by a staff member, their earlier confidence replaced by confusion. Parents whispered. Phones came out, not recording yet, but ready. The lead auditor finally addressed the assembly. She explained the review process, the scope, the necessity of immediate compliance. She mentioned a trigger event, an expulsion authorized under conflict of interest conditions. She did not mention names, not yet. He felt the shift as clearly as he'd felt the terminal hum the day before. Stage 4 was complete. The process had crossed into daylight. The meeting adjourned without resolution, which unsettled people more than a verdict would have. Uncertainty bred attention. Attention bred witnesses. As the room emptied, the principal approached him, posture rigid. "This is excessive," she said under her breath. "You could have come to me." "I did," he replied. "Through the system." Her eyes searched his face, trying to place him somewhere familiar and failing. "You're enjoying this?" "No," he said. "I'm finishing it." She turned away sharply, anger cracking through composure. He watched her go, knowing she would escalate now, because people who believed power was theirs rarely surrendered quietly. The counselor exhaled beside him. "What happens next?" "Now," he said, "they verify." Outside, the school buzzed with speculation. Parents lingered. Students sensed the tension and mirrored it. Somewhere online, messages were already circulating, incomplete but persistent. He walked his daughter toward class, stopping at the door. "You don't have to stay," he said. "I want to," she replied. He nodded, pride tightening his chest. As she disappeared inside, his phone vibrated once more. Stage 5, authorized. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, steady as ever. The truth was no longer just awake. It was visible. Its visibility changed everything. Parents lingered in clusters, phones half raised, voices lowered to whispers that carried farther than shouting. He stayed near the library doors, an ordinary presence amid uncommon attention, watching how authority adjusted when watched back. The auditors moved calmly, asking for rooms, requesting access, writing names without comment. Staff complied with brittle smiles. The principal disappeared into meetings, emerging briefly to reassure, then vanishing again. This was the preparation stage, when institutions exposed their seams. He knew restraint mattered now, letting uncertainty widen. Each unanswered question became leverage, each delay another mark against certainty itself today. He checked his phone only once, confirming. Schedules aligning without interference. Verification interviews would begin after lunch, staggered to prevent coordination. He anticipated the tactic. Separation revealed truth faster than pressure. The counselor passed by, eyes steadier, carrying a folder, now duplicated and logged. They exchanged a nod, nothing more. Public exposure demanded patience, not confrontation. Let them speak first. Let records answer. Outside, a local reporter hovered near the gate, curiosity sharpened by silence. Attention was spreading, organic and uncontrollable, exactly as designed. Witnesses arrived quietly, prepared notebooks open, expecting honesty rather than spectacle now from everyone present inside. He escorted his daughter between classes, not hovering, simply present. Whispers followed, some kind, some sharp, all noticed. A teacher paused, apologized softly for not intervening sooner. He accepted without judgment. Accountability worked best without humiliation. In a side room, auditors interviewed staff, voices muffled through walls. Names surfaced again, familiar ones tied to edits and exceptions. The system mapped behavior patiently. Meanwhile, the principal called an emergency board session, believing escalation could restore control. She underestimated process, mistaking visibility for vulnerability. The difference would soon matter. Parents watched carefully, measuring truth against statements today, remembering faces and timestamps closely. Preparation required containment. He avoided statements, declined interviews, and kept routine intact. Ordinary conduct disarmed suspicion better than denials. The reporter requested comment. He smiled politely and deferred to administrators. That restraint frustrated narratives hunting villains. Inside, auditors requested server mirrors, exporting data beyond local reach. A compliance memo circulated, freezing discretionary authority. The counselor texted that retaliation attempts had begun, subtle reassignment threats, canceled meetings. He replied with reassurance, document everything. Exposure thrives on records. Power falters when observed consistently, without drama, without anger, without retreat from those previously untouchable, including leadership figures and benefactors accustomed to silence only. Late afternoon, the board session invite leaked publicly, unintentionally widening the audience. Parents organized carpools to attend. Teachers whispered about protections, students sensed history. He reviewed timelines again, ensuring cause and effect remained clear. Public exposure demanded coherence. The trigger letter, the edits, the donations, the exceptions, nothing extraneous, nothing missing. He would speak only if required and only to confirm process, not motive. The truth didn't need theater, it needed light. And light, once introduced, traveled faster than control across rooms, screens, and communities, drawing attention from oversight bodies accustomed to patterns repeating unchecked for years before today finally. Evening approached with unresolved tension. The principal prepared statements, practicing empathy while drafting defenses. Counsel advised caution, yet she pressed forward, convinced presence equaled authority. He anticipated her move, a public forum to reframe events. The system welcomed it. He picked up his daughter, listened to her recount class calmly, then explained they'd attend a meeting together. She agreed, trusting his steadiness. Family-anchored strategy. Without that anchor, exposure risked cruelty. With it, accountability remained humane, focused, and precise despite pressure, noise, and attempts to derail truthful outcomes through distraction, delay, or deflection by interested parties today inside campus walls. Night settled, emails slowed, interviews concluded. Preliminary findings compiled quietly, not for headlines, but for record. He sat at the kitchen table, reviewing notes from memory only, ensuring consistency. The counselor messaged gratitude. He responded simply, acknowledging courage. Tomorrow would demand more. The board forum would open doors the institution preferred closed. He welcomed that. Exposure was cumulative, not explosive. Each verified fact added weight. When the scale tipped, it would do so publicly, with witnesses present, leaving no room for denial from any participant, administrator, or advisor attempting revisionism, minimization, or selective amnesia during review sessions ahead tomorrow morning. He checked on his daughter, sleeping peacefully, then turned off the light. Preparation had done its work. The victory strategy advanced without spectacle, exactly as intended. Tomorrow, exposure would deepen, not by accusation, but by sequence. He rested knowing the institution had chosen daylight by acting publicly. Systems corrected themselves when observed long enough. And if resistance came, it would arrive documented, time-stamped, and undeniable, adding itself to the record. The truth, now visible, would keep moving forward through boards, meetings, archives, and memory, until justice settled into policy, practice, and culture for everyone involved without exception or favor again. Morning arrived with a different weight. The campus felt like it was holding its breath, every hallway quieter than usual, every door closing more carefully. He sensed it the moment he stepped onto the grounds. This wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness. People knew something was happening, and they knew they were part of it whether they wanted to be or not. The board forum was scheduled for mid-morning, announced as an open administrative review. Folding chairs filled the gym, arranged in neat rows that suggested order, even as tension bled into the air. Parents arrived early. Teachers sat together instead of scattering. A few district officials took seats along the wall, notebooks open, expressions neutral. The reporter from yesterday stood near the exit, phone ready but pocketed, waiting for permission rather than chasing spectacle. He sat near the back with his daughter beside him, not hiding, not central, present, visible, ordinary. She swung her legs slightly, whispering a question about whether this was like a school assembly. He told her it was closer to one, and that honesty mattered more here than applause. The principal entered last. She walked to the front with practiced composure, shoulders back, chin lifted, carrying herself like someone used to command. Applause flickered and died quickly. The board members took their places. One of the auditors stood and explained the process again, slower this time, emphasizing that this was not disciplinary theater, but fact-finding. She invited statements in sequence. The principal spoke first. She acknowledged concerns, expressed regret over how events were perceived, and stressed her commitment to student safety. Her words were smooth, carefully framed to accept discomfort, without accepting fault. He watched parents' faces shift as they listened, weighing sincerity against memory. Then questions began. They were precise. Why were incident reports edited after submission? Why did exceptions align with specific families? Why did disciplinary outcomes vary under identical circumstances? Each question came with dates, references, and documentation. The principal answered where she could, deflected where she couldn't, and asked for time where the record spoke louder than her explanations. The counselor stood when called. She described pressure without accusation, describing meetings, language changes, and the cost of speaking up. Her voice wavered once, then steadied as she continued. Parents leaned forward. Teachers looked down. Notes were taken. If you're still following this, take a second and subscribe, because this part right here is where systems don't fall apart loudly. They unravel carefully, one verified truth at a time. The board chair asked if there were additional witnesses. A hand rose from the second row. A teacher spoke about patterns she'd noticed but never formalized. Another followed. Each account aligned with records already entered. Consistency replaced speculation. He didn't speak. That restraint frustrated some. Eyes drifted toward him, curious now, aware he was more than he seemed. The reporter noticed too, scribbling a note. The board chair finally acknowledged him with a glance, asking if he wished to add anything for clarity. He stood slowly, not to accuse, not to narrate pain, but to confirm process. He stated that he had observed procedures, noted deviations, and ensured records were preserved. He did not name names. He did not describe intent. He spoke like someone discussing maintenance schedules and compliance checks. The effect was sharper than any speech. The board chair nodded, then turned to the auditors. They summarized preliminary findings, not conclusions, findings. conflict of interest triggers, policy deviations, required actions. Immediate oversight measures. The gym shifted again, this time audibly. Murmurs rose, then quieted as the chair raised a hand. She announced that the principal would step aside, pending completion of the review, effective immediately. An interim administrator would assume duties. Further communication would follow in writing. The principal stood frozen for a moment, composure cracking just enough to reveal disbelief. She opened her mouth, then closed it, understanding finally that this wasn't a debate she could win by presence alone. He felt his daughter's hand find his. She squeezed once, hard, then relaxed. As people filed out, the reporter approached him again. He declined comment gently, directing attention to the board's statement. The counselor passed by, eyes wet, relief plain. Teachers lingered, exchanging looks that held years of unspoken things. Outside, the day felt lighter, not triumphant, resolved. He walked with his daughter across the courtyard, past the oak bench, past students who watched with new curiosity. No cheers, no apologies shouted across space. Just space. At the car, she looked up at him. "Is it done?" "The first part," he said. "The important part." They drove away as emails began landing across inboxes, as policies shifted from suggestion to requirement, as oversight embedded itself deeper. Public exposure had done its work not by spectacle, but by structure. Behind them, the school stood quieter, changed by witnesses who would remember this day not as a scandal, but as a correction. And corrections, once made in daylight, tended to last. And corrections, once made in daylight, tended to last. The interim administrator arrived the next morning, without ceremony, a quiet woman with a folder thicker than introductions. She moved through the building, as if measuring it, asking for keys, access, and time. Teachers noticed the difference immediately. No speeches, no promises. Just procedures reinstated and expectations clarified. He watched from the service corridor as doors reopened that had stayed shut for years. Files were requested without hesitation. Calendars were adjusted without negotiation. The building breathed differently, less tense, more deliberate. Oversight was no longer theoretical. Parents gathered again by midweek, this time in smaller groups comparing notes. The board released a written update outlining steps taken and timelines ahead. Names were omitted, but consequences were not. That restraint mattered. Accountability didn't require spectacle to be effective. His daughter returned to routine, walking halls without shrinking. A few classmates offered quiet apologies. Others watched, uncertain. She didn't chase validation. She focused on her work, reclaiming space by simply existing in it. He stayed nearby, not hovering, present when needed. The counselor met with auditors twice more, each session shorter than the last. Truth, once spoken, simplified things. She looked lighter, though tired, and thanked him again. He redirected the thanks toward process, toward timing, toward the choice she'd made. People deserved credit without pedestal. Resistance surfaced in predictable ways. Emails circulated questioning authority. Anonymous messages suggested bias. A donor threatened withdrawal. The board acknowledged receipt and proceeded anyway. The system recorded every attempt to interfere, not to punish immediately, but to understand patterns. Exposure widened without confrontation. The former principal did not return. Her absence became a fact others adjusted to. Students whispered, teachers recalibrated, parents recalculated expectations. Power had shifted quietly, and the quiet made it harder to challenge. Late in the week, a formal notice arrived requesting his presence at a closed review session. He read it twice, noting language that assumed cooperation rather than demanded it. This was the step that followed exposure, verification of authority. He prepared without anxiety, assembling nothing, rehearsing nothing. The record already spoke. The session convened in a neutral building downtown. Glass walls, long table, water untouched. Board members sat alongside external reviewers. The interim administrator attended as observer. Questions were direct, procedural, unemotional. They asked how he'd noticed discrepancies. He explained routines. They asked why he'd preserved records. He explained policy. They asked what role he held. He answered truthfully, without flourish, confirming his appointment, its duration, and its purpose. Heads nodded, notes were taken. No one looked surprised. One reviewer asked why he'd chosen silence for so long. He paused, then said that systems revealed themselves best when allowed to act naturally. Intervention too early masked intent. That answer satisfied them. The meeting ended without drama. No congratulations, no apologies. Just acknowledgement and next steps. Public confirmation would follow at the board's discretion. Until then, continuity mattered. Driving home, he felt the weight finally ease. Not relief exactly, but completion of a phase. Exposure had done what it was meant to do: surface truth, redistribute power, protect the vulnerable. At dinner, his daughter asked if she'd have to move schools. He told her no. She smiled and returned to her homework, confident now in that answer. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of specifics, aware only that something had corrected itself. Institutions rarely announced their healing. They demonstrated it over time. He washed dishes, listening to water run, thinking about how easily things could have gone differently. Quiet vigilance had been the difference. Tomorrow would bring formal statements. The final acknowledgement would be public, unavoidable. The last piece remained. That night, he reviewed nothing and checked nothing, trusting the work already finished. Trust, he'd learned, was earned by process, not hope. The board would issue its confirmation soon, formal and public, and with it, the record would close around the truth. There would be appeals, of course, and carefully worded objections, but they would arrive late and documented. The institution would adapt because adaptation was cheaper than denial. Teachers would teach differently. Parents would ask better questions. Students would learn that rules applied upward as well as down. The counselor would sleep more easily. His daughter would walk taller without knowing why. None of that required his presence anymore. That was the measure of success. When systems functioned, individuals could step back. He valued that restraint more than recognition. The work had never been about winning. It had been about restoring balance where fear had tipped it. Balance endured when quietly maintained. He understood that maintenance done well was invisible, and invisibility was the point. Because permanence depended on habits repeated after attention moved elsewhere long after meetings ended and cameras left. Long after meetings ended and cameras left, permanence depended on what followed. The board's confirmation arrived 3 days later, released publicly in the quietest way possible. A formal statement posted at 7:12 a.m., precise language, no adjectives wasted. It confirmed procedural violations, administrative failures, and corrective actions. It named no villains. It named responsibilities. The principal's position was listed as vacated. Oversight authority was reaffirmed. Future audits were scheduled. By the time parents saw it, the decision had already settled. He read the statement once, then put his phone away. The document did what it needed to do. Any further attention would only cheapen it. Institutions corrected themselves best when they weren't forced into spectacle. At school, the shift was unmistakable. Teachers spoke more carefully, not from fear, but from clarity. Meetings followed agendas. Records stayed intact. The interim administrator circulated with calm authority, addressing gaps without assigning blame. Students sensed the change without understanding it, like weather turning slowly after a storm. His daughter came home that afternoon, smiling in a way she hadn't in months. "They moved my seat," she said, next to the window. He nodded, understanding the significance. Small restorations mattered. Power didn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it gave a child back a view. The counselor requested a brief meeting before dismissal. She looked composed, professional, grounded. "I wanted to tell you," she said. "They offered me a permanent role in compliance." "That fits," he replied. "I was afraid to say yes," she admitted. "But now, it feels right." He smiled, the smallest acknowledgement. Good systems need people who remember why they exist. As they walked out together, a group of parents paused nearby, conversations trailing off. One approached, cautiously. "We didn't know," she said, "about what our kids were doing, about how things were handled." "I know," he replied. "That's why records matter." She nodded, chastened but relieved. Accountability wasn't about shame. It was about awareness, arriving in time to matter. Late that day, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to his home. No return address, but he recognized the format immediately. Inside was a single-page memo acknowledging the successful execution of oversight protocols and confirming the closure of the active review. At the bottom was a line offering optional public acknowledgement at a future date. He folded the paper and set it aside. Optional meant unnecessary. That evening, he took his daughter for ice cream, a ritual postponed too many times. They sat on a bench, feet dangling, watching traffic. She talked about a science fair idea involving water filtration. He listened, present, grateful for the ordinariness returning. "Did you fix it?" she asked suddenly. "What?" he said. "The school." He considered the question. "I didn't fix it," he said. "I reminded it how it was supposed to work." She accepted that answer easily. Children understood systems better than adults gave them credit for. The following week, the reporter published a piece. It focused on policy reform, oversight mechanisms, and the importance of transparent governance. It did not name him. It did not need to. The story's power came from structure, not personalities. Comments were thoughtful, restrained, unusually so, for public discourse. The former principal issued a statement through counsel expressing disappointment and intent to appeal certain findings. The appeal was noted, logged, and scheduled. No urgency attached. Appeals were part of the system too. The outcome wouldn't change the correction already made. On Friday, he finished his shift as usual, cleaning after an assembly celebrating student achievements. He worked methodically, unnoticed, content. Maintenance, done right, left no trace. As he locked the service closet, the interim administrator approached. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For trusting the process." He nodded. "It only works if someone does." She hesitated, then added, "Your daughter's record has been formally cleared. The note about the expulsion attempt has been removed entirely." "Thank you," he said. Walking out into the evening, he felt the final tension release. The victory strategy had reached its end, not with applause, but with alignment. Exposure had occurred, consequences followed, dignity restored. At home, he placed the sealed memo in a drawer and closed it. Some things didn't need revisiting. The work was finished. Upstairs, his daughter practiced a presentation, reading aloud with growing confidence. He paused on the stairs, listening, smiling to himself. Balance had returned, and balance, once restored, asked only one thing in return: that it be maintained, that it be maintained. Maintenance looked different now. It wasn't just about broken locks or flickering lights. It was about habits reinforced quietly, without the drama that had brought attention in the first place. The school moved forward, not healed completely, but steadier. Policies were followed because people knew someone was paying attention, even if they couldn't see who. He returned to routine fully. Early mornings, tool cart rolling over familiar floors, hallways that no longer felt hostile, just busy. Teachers greeted him by name now, some with warmth, some with an awkwardness that came from recognizing how wrong they'd been, without knowing how to address it. He didn't push them to. Guilt resolved itself better through action than conversation. His daughter adjusted too. She stopped scanning rooms for threats. Her shoulders relaxed. Laughter came easier, not forced or cautious. The science fair project took shape on the kitchen table. Filters and diagrams spread everywhere. He helped when asked, stepped back when she didn't need him. Protection didn't mean control, it meant space. The counselor settled into her new role quickly. She spoke with clarity now, meetings efficient, records meticulous. When they crossed paths, she thanked him again, quietly. He redirected the credit as always. Systems mattered more than saviors. The appeal hearing came and went without spectacle. The former principal's arguments were narrow, technical, and insufficient. The record held. Findings stood. The appeal was denied. A brief notice circulated, factual and final. That chapter closed. Community reaction was muted but meaningful. Parents volunteered more. Teachers collaborated across departments. Students noticed fairness applied evenly, not just when convenient. No banners marked the change. It showed up in small things: fewer whispered complaints, more raised hands, consistent consequences. One afternoon, as he replaced a damaged hinge near the gym, a student stopped him. "My mom says you helped fix things," the girl said, earnest. He tightened the screw, then straightened. "A lot of people did." She nodded, accepting that, and ran off. Later that week, the interim administrator announced her permanent appointment. Applause filled the auditorium, genuine this time. She spoke briefly, emphasizing transparency and shared responsibility. She didn't single anyone out. Leadership, done right, distributed credit. He stood near the back, unnoticed, content. At home, life settled into patterns he'd missed. Dinner conversations drifted beyond school. Weekends filled with errands, movies, plans. The weight he'd carried for months eased enough that he could breathe without effort. One evening, his daughter asked about her mother, not with sadness, but curiosity. He told stories, careful ones, about kindness and fairness, about standing up quietly when it mattered. She listened, eyes, thoughtful, drawing connections without prompting. "She would have liked your school now," she said. He nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I think so." The reporter emailed once more, asking for reflection, a personal angle to close the story. He declined politely. The narrative didn't need him. It needed to stand on its own, focused on outcomes rather than personalities. Oversight updates continued quarterly, uneventful by design. That was success. When reviews became routine, integrity followed naturally. Fear faded. Trust rebuilt itself slowly, honestly. He kept working, unseen again, the way he preferred. Authority returned to its proper place, not hovering, not oppressive, simply present. The system functioned because people believed it would. One morning, as he unlocked a supply room, the interim administrator passed by. "We're adding a student council liaison to compliance meetings," she said. "Your daughter was recommended." He paused. "She doesn't need that." "She earned it," the administrator replied. He considered, then nodded. Opportunity offered, not imposed. That night, he told his daughter. Her eyes widened, excitement tempered by uncertainty. "I don't want to get in trouble again," she said. "You won't," he replied, "because now the rules are clear." She smiled, that quiet confidence returning. As weeks passed, the story faded from conversation, replaced by new concerns, new routines. That was how it should be. Justice that lingered too loudly risked becoming spectacle. He cleaned his tools at the end of each day, putting everything back where it belonged. Order restored wasn't dramatic. It was reliable. Standing in the doorway one evening, watching his daughter practice her presentation, he felt something settle fully. Not pride exactly. Completion. The system hadn't just corrected itself. It had learned, and learning, once embedded, tended to last. And learning, once embedded, tended to last. The school year moved toward its close without incident, which was the clearest sign that something fundamental had changed. There were no whispered warnings, no sudden meetings behind closed doors, no children shrinking under rules that bent for some and hardened for others. Consistency became the norm. That alone reshaped everything. On the morning of the science fair, sunlight poured through the gym windows, glinting off poster boards and careful handwriting. He arrived early, as always, tool cart in hand, helping set up tables and secure loose cords. The work was simple, honest, necessary. Around him, parents filtered in, carrying projects, laughter mixing with nerves. His daughter stood beside her display, hands clasped, eyes bright. She explained water filtration calmly, confidently, answering questions without glancing at him for reassurance. That was new. He watched from a distance, not hovering, letting her own the space she'd earned. The interim administrator stopped by her, table, listened, asked thoughtful questions, and thanked her for her clarity. Teachers nodded along, impressed. No one mentioned the past. No one needed to. When awards were announced, her name wasn't called first or second. It came later, steady recognition without spectacle. She smiled, proud but not overwhelmed, and he felt something deep and quiet settle in his chest. This was what restoration looked like, not triumph. Balance. After cleanup, he locked the storage room and stepped outside. Parents gathered in small groups, talking about summer plans. A few waved at him now, genuine, no longer confused about who he was. Respect had arrived without demand. At home that evening, they ate dinner together, the windows open to warm air and distant sounds of the neighborhood. His daughter talked about student council meetings planned for next year, about ideas she wanted to propose, about fairness and clarity like they were normal expectations instead of fragile hopes. They listened now, she said. They should, he replied. Later, as she worked on homework, he opened the drawer where he'd placed the sealed memo weeks ago. He took it out, unfolded it once more, then slid it into the shredder. The paper disappeared quietly, exactly how it should. Authority that lingered too long became temptation. His role had been temporary by design. The next morning, he submitted a request to reduce his hours over the summer, not to leave, just to step back. Maintenance didn't require constant presence once systems were stable. Trusting that was part of the work too. On his final shift before break, the counselor stopped him in the hallway. I wanted you to know, she said. We updated the reporting framework district-wide. That's good, he replied. We used your recommendations. He smiled faintly. Use them until they don't fit anymore. She laughed, understanding. Progress meant revision. As he walked the halls one last time before summer, he noticed small things. A teacher patiently redirecting a student without embarrassment. A bulletin board updated accurately. A locked door fixed promptly. None of it dramatic. All of it essential. Outside, the oak bench waited, leaves casting shifting shadows across stone. He sat there for a moment, remembering the day his daughter had sat alone, clutching a backpack, unsure if the world would protect her. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It reminded him why silence, when chosen carefully, could be louder than shouting. She joined him, ice cream in hand, grinning. Can we go to the lake this weekend? Yes, he said. We can. They stood and walked toward the car, passing the school without looking back. There was nothing left to check, nothing left to fix. The system would hold, and if it didn't, someone else would notice. That was the point. Justice hadn't arrived like a storm. It had arrived like maintenance, methodical, unglamorous, permanent. He drove with the windows down, summer air filling the car, his daughter humming softly beside him. Life moved forward, not untouched by what had happened, but strengthened by it. Some stories ended with applause. This one ended with quiet continuity, with dignity restored and lessons learned where they mattered most. Before you go, subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?